Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into Episode 4, AI Literacy as a Strategic Moat. We're going to unpack Article 4 of the new EU AI Act, and more importantly, we'll look at how the Spectre of Insight framework takes what feels like a really daunting legal headache and turns it into a massive opportunity to completely redesign your workforce. Let's dive right in.
So, let's start with the immediate threat here. 35 million euros. Or, if it's higher, up to 7% of your global annual turnover. Let that sink in for a second. That is the maximum fine for violating the new EU AI Act. For most businesses, a hit like that isn't just a penalty, it's an absolute extinction event. The European Union is making it crystal clear. The Wild West era of artificial intelligence, it's officially over. They've rolled out the world's first comprehensive AI law, and the stakes for getting this wrong literally could not be higher.
Now, when we look at the specific language in Article 4, it's pretty fascinating. It explicitly says that providers and deployers must ensure a sufficient level of AI literacy of their staff. Listen, this isn't a friendly suggestion from regulators, it's mandatory law. It requires actual verifiable training. The EU Commission has already clarified that just, firing off an office memo or asking your team to skim a ChatGPT manual simply isn't going to cut it. Whether your engineers are building complex algorithms or your marketing team is just using Copilot to draft a few emails, if anyone in your organization is touching an AI system, you are legally on the hook to train them.
And that brings us to the core philosophy of the Spectre of Insight framework. Look, most founders are going to read Article 4, groan, and treat it like just another painful compliance burden. But this framework flips the script completely. We see regulatory change as an incredible opportunity. Think about it. Regulation usually exists just to protect the current market architecture. But when the rules change this dramatically, it opens up these really brief, highly lucrative windows to redesign how a market actually works. The first movers who jump through that window, they don't just comply. They capture a disproportionate amount of value while the big incumbents are still stumbling around trying to find their footing. To really capitalize on this, you need a fundamental paradigm shift. Your conventional company builder is going to view this AI literacy mandate as a sunk cost. They just want to check the compliance box, optimize within the new rules, and get back to business as usual. But a market architect, well, they look at this exact same rule and see a state-mandated opportunity. Instead of a cost, they see the perfect excuse to invest in building brand new intellectual infrastructure for their entire team.
But before we get into the massive upside of redesigning your workforce, we really have to ask, why is the EU being so incredibly strict about this? What actually happens if we don't build this foundational AI literacy? To understand why this intellectual upgrade is so necessary, we have to look at the real-world stakes of letting untrained staff just experiment freely with these incredibly powerful tools.
Unregulated AI use leads directly to some pretty disastrous high-risk realities. Take systematic bias, for example. There's that famous real-world case where Amazon had to completely scrap an AI hiring tool. Why? Because it was systematically down-prioritizing female applicants based on biased historical training data. Add in hallucinations where the AI just confidently invents totally fake facts, plus the massive risks of employees innocently feeding your sensitive customer data into public models, and you've got a perfect recipe for GDPR and copyright breaches. Without literacy, your workforce isn't just a bit inefficient, they become an active liability. Which brings us right back to Spectre's core theory. AI literacy is not about building a better product. It is pure infrastructure innovation. You are establishing new, highly defensible rails for how value, information, and decisions flow safely through your company. Great companies rarely win just by launching slightly better features, right? They win by building superior underlying systems. Think of AI literacy as the new required operating system for your human capital.
So how do we actually build this infrastructure? Well, the source material gives us a brilliant blueprint for Level 1 compliance, translated directly from the Norwegian AI curriculum strategy. It takes this vague legal requirement and turns it into a concrete, highly actionable program. In just about 4 hours total, you cover the basics, what AI actually is, the specific legal requirements of the Act, hands-on practical tooling, those vital risks we just talked about, and finally, your company's own internal guidelines. By the end of this half-day session, your team goes from being a compliance risk to being structurally aligned and ready to move.
And here is the incredible edge this gives you. The recent data highlights a fascinating irony. Over half the workforce is already experimenting with AI tools in the shadows, but at the same time, 77% of businesses admit that a lack of competence is their absolute biggest barrier to adopting AI effectively. Very few employees actually feel sufficiently trained. Now that creates a massive vulnerability for your competitors, but it creates a deep structural moat for you. If you solve this competence gap first, you pull miles ahead while everyone else is still scratching their heads trying to figure out how to safely turn the technology on.
Because here's what happens. When your entire team hits that baseline literacy, they stop operating in those slow, traditional, linear chains. Since they actually understand the tools at their fingertips, they start spotting inefficiencies naturally. They start collapsing intermediaries, reducing friction, and basically helping you design a fundamentally more efficient business architecture. Value flows so much faster from creation to consumption simply because your people are finally empowered to build direct connections using AI. And you can apply the Spectre blueprint directly to this whole upskilling process. You start by analyzing your current market architecture and your compliance gaps, which helps you pinpoint exactly where a lack of AI literacy is slowing you down. From there, you redesign your internal systems, say by rolling out that 4-hour training module we mentioned. Then, you build up your newly upskilled team as a fresh venture, and ultimately scale that new architecture across the entire organization. You are quite literally treating your team's intellect like a designable, scalable system.
Cultivating this mindset leads to what SpecHub calls global ambition. You see, a deeply AI-literate workforce doesn't just do their daily tasks a little bit faster. When you actually take the time to teach them how the underlying systems work, they develop the ambition to help you, the founder, architect entire industries. They stop being simple cogs in a machine and transition into active co-designers of your platform's future. I want to leave you with this foundational Spectre principle. The most powerful position in any market is not the best player, it is the architect of the game. The EU AI Act is forcing a brand new game onto the entire global market, complete with new rules and, as we saw, extinction-level penalties for ignorance. So the real question is, are you going to be just another player scrambling to comply and paying fines, or are you going to use AI literacy as the foundation to become the architect who designs the future of your industry? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.